Welcome everybody to the Thoughtful Bro live streaming on A Mighty Blaze today. I'm so happy to have you here. This is going to be an exciting adventure full of billions of dollars and schadenfreude and cautionary tales for the new economy in the next 45 minutes or so. I am so excited about this book for reasons I will rapidly explain. But first, just a word about A Mighty Blaze. As usual, we're a group of people in the publishing industry and authors who got together when COVID happened, because we had so many friends and friends of friends who had book tours canceled. In this world, you can't do real life events anymore, which is a lot of the lifeblood of promoting a book. And so we try to get authors on the show, on my show and others on A Mighty Blaze, who are publishing a book or about to publish a book or recently published a book, and just try to help them connect with readers. So, if you want to support the Mighty Blaze, it's very easy. We're an all volunteer organization. All you got to do is like us, subscribe us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Twitter. If you want to really support us, though, you are going to buy Reeves' book, because it is a tremendous read. You will not be disappointed. I frankly think this is like a book that people are going to look back on as a kind of book that encapsulates a certain kind of age. So I think this is, I don't want to go too far, but I feel like this is sort of like a classic in the making. I really love this book, and I think you guys are going to enjoy this conversation. If you want to ask Reeves any questions about the book, as usual, just put it in the chat and it will make its way to me. I'll leave about 5 minutes at the end for some audience questions. So with that said, I want to give a little bit of an introduction. Reeves Wiedeman is a contributing editor at New York Magazine. He's written for The New Yorker, The New York Times Magazine, Rolling Stone, Harper's, Men's Journal, and other publications. Billion Dollar Loser is his first book. It's a book of nonfiction. This book is about, I don't even know how to summarize this book. It's just so amazing in so many ways, but I'll try in a nutshell. It's a book about a kind of cult-like founder of a company called WeWork named Adam Newman. He raised billions and billions of dollars, and yet towards the end of WeWork's catastrophic collapse, the company was losing about $200,000 per hour. It's a book about millennial hustle. It's about gravity-free, kind of rules-free investing, where if you ask a question like, how will this company ever make a profit? You're just considered a wet blanket and you get kicked out of the party. It's a book about also a dead unicorn. We're going to talk about what unicorns are. It's about having a company that's all sizzle and no steak. And frankly, it's sort of schadenfreude porn. I mean, if you really like your schadenfreude, this is the book for you. So Bloomberg said about this book, quote, "In the distant future, when historians recall the geyser of cash that banks and venture capitalists directed to Silicon Valley, they will almost certainly use the catastrophic collapse of WeWork as a cautionary tale." And because I always like to add in at least one book, Goodreads review, this is like the best one. Quote, "This is a beautiful tale of hubris, magical thinking, and bullshit." Reeves, welcome to the Thoughtful Bro.
Thank you for having me. I think that reviewer just summed things up, so I'm good to go. I'm out of here.
Totally, I love that review. All right, so Reeves, first, could you just hold up the book so people can see the cover of it?
Sure, the cover is the prettiest part of the whole thing. So there you go. We've Adam Newman, the founder of WeWork's face there in a sort of cult-like glow. So
oh my God,
this is the book.
And what a glow it is. Reeves, I got to congratulate you. It's a remarkable book. I mean, some of you know me, I have a background in reporting for Reuters. I covered finance and venture capital. This is like absolutely a dead center hit for a topic that I know a little something about. And I just think it is not easy to translate kind of complex financial dealings into layman's terms. And I think you just did a remarkable job, and it kind of reads like a page-turning thriller almost. So congratulations.
Yeah. Thanks. And I am not someone who had a finance or business background. I've spent a lot of the last few years reporting on business and startups in particular, and gotten to learn it. But I think, this is a story about people. And I think one of the things that has sort of rung true to me looking at WeWork and other companies and the world of business in general is that we think of it as all numbers and models and whatnot, but at the heart of all these businesses are people, flawed people making decisions every hour of every day. So that's what the book, that's I think what's at the heart of a lot of the book, to go along with all the gobsmacking numbers. The $200,000 an hour was a new one for me even. So there's no shortage of crazy numbers to think about.
It's funny. There was back when I was covering private equity and venture capital, there was a founder of a very famous private equity firm who once said to me, he's like, my entire job boils down to this one thing: making very fine judgments about human beings. Mm-hmm. And I think like that's what you see here. I mean, it's like there's only judgments about human beings. There's no judgments about business models. And I think, I mean, depending on how you look at it, like some bad judgments were made by a lot of people here. So anyway, go ahead and tell us what the book is about.
Sure. So basically the book is the story of WeWork, the company, and from start, not to finish, WeWork still exists, which is something we can get into, but from the launch of the company in 2010 up through last year, the fall of 2019, when the company's attempt to go public on the New York Stock Exchange failed miserably. So what and sort of what the story does is it starts with the founder, Adam Newman. We start with his childhood, and when I started reporting on the company, as I sort of alluded to, everything good and bad about WeWork sort of is summed up in Adam. And so a lot of the book is sort of just telling his story of being a young guy in New York City, trying to make it big, the decisions he and others made along the way. And then I think to take it to a sort of broader level, all people around him in the company, the investors, the landlords, the backers, the supporters, the startup community that was kind of pushing this company up and up and up along the way. And then was also there to observe and in some ways fuel the downturn. So I think it's a story of WeWork, and I think as I thought about it, it's also the story of the last decade of sort of the startup venture capital boom that we were in, and trying to take stock of what happened now that we're clearly in a new era.
Yeah, there's a great quote in the book where with kind of typical grandiosity, Adam says, the 2000s were the decade of like iPod, iPad, Steve Jobs' decade, and the 2010s will be the decade of we. And I think he's right, but sort of not in the way that he meant.
It's true. And the way that he was thinking about it was that there was this movement towards networks and to community in a variety of ways. And if you go back a decade, Facebook was kind of a novelty. It was a thing that was only a few years out from just being college students, and sort of these ideas of creating these digital communities and networks. This bigger, broader we was still kind of something new and that seemed at the time, at least, to be exciting and without any downsides. I think clearly we've seen many of the downsides of that, both in kind of the Facebook story and the WeWork story as well.
So, all right, so let's just ground the audience here, if we can, in what WeWork actually is. And I think what's funny about this question is so Reeves is about to kind of do his best to explain what this company is. And in fact, it's quite simple in a way, but I think one of the most fascinating parts of the story is the way that there is a huge spread between what the business really did and the way that Adam would explain what it did. And that in many ways is at the heart of the problem here. So what was WeWork, and how did Adam explain it?
Yeah, it was the heart of the company's rise and its fall. And the basic business is simple, as you said. What WeWork does is they lease office space. They come in, they renovate it, they slice it up into smaller offices. They put a beer keg in the middle and kind of places for people to congregate. And then they rent out those little offices for in totality more than they're paying in rent for the space at large. That's the business. It's sort of a simple arbitrage. You rent at a certain price, and then you bring in revenue bring in more revenue than that. So that's all the business is, and it's not really a new business. It kind of had existed before. There were companies who did frankly, sort of boring versions of what WeWork did, just kind of bland offices. If you needed to go get kind of a white walled room like the one it looks like I'm in right now, although it's just my home office, you could go get that. But what WeWork did is it took that idea and made it cool. Early on in the early 2010s, post financial crisis sort of world, it was a time when people were questioning the man and working for a big corporation. And so WeWork was a place where you wanted to start your little company. You were a freelancer. You could go there and get an office. And it had flexible lease terms and cool design and this sense of community. And so that's what the business is. That's what it was at the beginning. And frankly, that's more or less what it was by the end. It had expanded and grown in all kinds of ways, but that was what the simple business is. As you alluded to, Adam talked about the business in very different ways at various points. And from very early on, within 2 years, and he was really kind of talking about it even before that, but on WeWork's 2-year anniversary, he said that the company was no longer a real estate leasing company. It was a physical social network. And that was kind of how he was describing the company. And this was the era of, it was a few years after The Social Network, the movie. He had in fact pitched this idea of a physical social network to Sean Parker, who's played by Justin Timberlake in the movie and was an early sort of Facebook backer. He was trying to position WeWork as kind of a piece of these kind of tech companies, these big networks that were expanding out of Silicon Valley. And so that was the first iteration. Later on, he would talk about it as a community company. By the end of it, they were in the business of elevating the world's consciousness, anything but leasing out office space. And that for a long time fed this narrative that WeWork was more than that, more than just a simple real estate company. And then it was only really towards the end that people really started to really question that.
It's amazing. I mean, every time I saw that line in the book that it's a physical social network, I mean, I almost fell out of my chair laughing because, I mean, somebody observes this in the book, like the obvious observations to make is the word for a physical social network is life. Like that's what life is. And like the tremendous irony of it, Reeves, is that like, because he's so kind of insecure about the company not being truly a tech company, because he feels like that's what he needs to rationalize it to his investors as a tech company. So he says it's a physical social network instead of an online social network. Then he spends a lot of money building a software social network within his physical social network. So it's like it went from life to a social network to back to a physical social network, then a social network again.
Yeah. And it never really worked. You know, it was kind of the software they built was essentially like an internal LinkedIn, but LinkedIn is there. And whether or not you like LinkedIn, it works for what it is. And you're right. I mean, and this is something I had actually talked to Adam about when I interviewed him. And this was back in the spring of 2019 when things were still sort of going. And it felt like what he wanted to do was to create this kind of insular bubble where everyone you knew and everything you did was inside of the we world, as it were. But it's not clear that anyone needs that in fact, the better part of life and the better part of creating a social network is kind of the fact that you can pick and choose from many different parts of the world. And Adam was trying to create this thing that it's not really clear anyone wanted, frankly.
Right. I mean, my read on it, honestly, is that like, you did a great job of kind of portraying him when he was like doing some of his failed startups at first and kind of like this manic energy that he had. And it just seemed like he was a guy who's extremely energetic, who is very cool, like good looking guy. His sister is like Miss Teen Israel. He's married to Gwyneth Paltrow's cousin. He's friends with Jared Kushner. He's like, he's moving in these rarefied circles, kind of really cool circles, by some people's estimate. And the bottom line is like, this guy knows how to party, and anywhere this guy is, it's like, he's got this feeling of like, this is the place to be. And it just feels like that was ultimately like what he was selling and what he believed in, because he was so good at living this kind of party, like cool life. He's just like, I'm going to make this the lifestyle for the whole world.
Yeah. I mean, you know, whatever you want to say about Adam, he's a fun guy to be around.
Yeah.
You know, he's the kind of guy you want to have a beer with or a shot of tequila with, as was more often the case. And so, you know, I think he was selling out a little bit. And in some ways, you know, he was selling a partying lifestyle, and he was also selling this notion that what WeWork was doing was, you know, rebuilding these broken social bonds of the fact that we're all on Facebook and Instagram, and that WeWork itself will make the world a better place. And on the one hand, those are good things. Like in theory, there, I think things we could all agree that like are problems that our society is dealing with. The part of the issue was that it wasn't clear WeWork was actually delivering on that. That ultimately what it was is that they made nice office spaces, and they were office spaces where some days you go to the office and you are annoyed with something that happens, and other days it's like a kind of great place to be. And so the mission of how Adam talked about the company sort of became separated from what the company actually did.
Right. Okay, let's keep moving. I got a lot of questions, and it's just such a fascinating situation. So let's just talk about like actually like what the plan was. I mean, there's sort of an interesting, you know, I referred in my opening to like gravity-free kind of investing, and there's this theory. I think Reid Hoffman, the founder of LinkedIn, put out about blitz scale. This idea that like, if you scale a company rapidly enough, you can kind of like bend the rules of investing. You don't have to worry about profit. You can do really non-intuitive things and just basically do what appears to be like burning through money, wasting money. But I think the idea is that, I mean, Amazon is an example of a company that did this very successfully in a lot of ways, just burning through capital, not turning a profit. And the idea is, and Amazon has sort of borne this out in a lot of ways, once the dust settles, there'll be no competitors left. You'll be the 800-pound gorilla, and then you're just going to print money. Was that sort of like the argument that, I mean, like his charisma is one thing, but his investors were very sophisticated people. Was that sort of what they were thinking?
Yes, I think to a certain degree, it's certainly what Adam was thinking. He was telling people kind of early on, you know, he would have these moments where WeWork would pay well above what it should have been paying to lease out a space. And he would tell his competitors who, you know, he's paying 20, 30% more. He said, you know, I'm not trying to make money. I'm just trying to add people. I'm trying to get bigger. I'm trying to get bigger and bigger and bigger until, you know, on the one hand, maybe this physical social network starts to work. On the other hand, you are just sort of too big to fail. And that's another concept that Adam sort of started to talk about. We think about it as a bad thing as a society. He saw it as potentially an asset to WeWork, where the company could become so entrenched into the real estate market in New York or San Francisco or London or some of these bigger cities, where landlords would kind of have to bend to its will a little bit. And so there was definitely this ethos of if we just continue to grow, eventually we'll figure out how to make money. That seemed to be the impulse from investors. At least there was not a huge amount of concern about the amount of money that the company was burning. Real estate is a very expensive industry to be in. This was not a software business where you can just kind of get as many users as you can and then one day flip the switch and charge them money or start selling ads or whatever it is. From day one, you're spending lots of money. So they needed the capital upfront from these investors. And by and large, they were willing to buy into the idea that growing so big could produce something that would kind of warp the economics of the real estate world. And I think that was the only business they wanted. You know, the sophisticated investors that you're talking about didn't want to fund a nice little profitable real estate business. They wanted to fund a business that could change the way sort of real estate operated. And if you could somehow do that, the potential revenue that you could bring in and the potential spoils for investors was huge. But the only way you do that is to grow bigger and bigger and bigger, not to just grow kind of responsibly.
Yeah, okay. And so I totally see that. That's exactly right. And like I saw that in the book. And the other thing, just building on that I saw was this amazing trick that Adam did. And it takes an enormous amount of chutzpah to do this kind of trick. But the trick was, I saw it, he did it several times. Basically this. It's like, well, look, if we go into this meeting with investors who can give us a lot of money, and we say we're going to be $100 million business, they're going to be like, nah, don't want it. But if we just say we're going to be $100 billion business, then they will invest. And it was sort of like this like reverse engineering of the thing. It's like, it wasn't like, how do the numbers look and what can I forecast from the numbers? It was, what do the investors want to hear? What number do they want to hear? And then let's just assume whatever we need to assume. 100% occupancy, like not a single mistake. I mean, nothing happens in the macro economy. Just like, it doesn't matter what we assume. Let's just put that number out there, the biggest number we can think of, and then we'll get the attention. And like that trick just seemed to work, right?
Yeah, it's there's a sort of legendary story at this point from the sort of the 2000s when Airbnb was launching, and I think it mentioned briefly, but they were coming up with their first pitch deck, and on there I think the number they had was something like, we anticipate one day we could have $30 million in revenue, and this was before they had even really launched, and their advisor said, change it to 30 billion, change it from 30 million to 30 billion. And the famous, possibly apocryphal quote is, investors want bees, baby. And that was kind of that was the world that Adam entered. And there were all kinds of examples of WeWork sort of taking the numbers and there was been no suggestion to me, at least, that the numbers were fraudulent, because these were all projections. They were all like, here's what could happen if everything goes to plan. But it got to an absurd level where there was one point, which we can talk about, sort of SoftBank and its influence on the company. But when they came in as WeWork's biggest investors, there was a team that was responsible for sort of coming up with projections that could meet the goals that SoftBank wanted for the company. And the team on the West Coast in the United States, they wanted to hit this certain goal. They looked at the available real estate in every major city on the West Coast of the United States. They looked at all the real estate that was under construction. And even if they filled all of that space, they still couldn't hit the projections that they were trying to get. And so it got to this level of like, you're asking us to do something that we may just not actually be able to do, but it's what the investors want. They want us to dream big. And so we'll dream big. Yeah,
and in the end, it's a weird thing, because it's like there's this greater fool theory in investing, where it's like, like the guys at Benchmark who made the one of the early investments, those guys made out like bandits. It was an incredibly great deal for them. And the idea, basically, the greater fool theory is like, sort of like just any kind of bubble thinking, just like if you invest at one level, even if it's fraudulent, and I'm not saying it's fraudulent, it's not fraud we're dealing with here, but like, even if it's just crazy, as long as you are sure that somebody else will buy you out later before it collapses, then you're just not holding the bag, and then you can make money, which is exactly what happened for Benchmark.
Yeah, and I think, at least I'd like to think that investors didn't get into this as that was the only reason they were investing. But Adam's very convincing, and one of the, I think, reasons that people were willing to invest is they did believe that, okay, I see all the problems in this business, but Adam's very convincing. If anyone's going to do it, he's going to be able to do it, and he's going to be able to convince the next guy that he can do it as well. So I think that was kind of a key part of how the thing ballooned over the years.
All right, so we are going to get into SoftBank, but basically in some ways this book is a bromance between like two very influential, charismatic, powerful guys. But like, let's just take them one at a time. So first, let's just talk for a minute about the character of Adam. I mean, there's this great quote in the book that his high school driving instructor said something like, this guy is either going to end up in jail or he's going to be a millionaire. And we saw sort of like both sides of that in this story. But I think that like Adam, I mean, he's a very interesting guy. He describes himself as, he believes everybody has a superpower, and his superpower is change. And by the way, his superpower allows him to have all the other superpowers, according to him. But I guess so my specific question for you about Adam is like, look, man, you met this guy, right? I mean, did he work his magic on you? Like, how did being in his reality distortion field, if you will, like, was your reality distorted as well?
He has a way. I mean, there's a few things about Adam. He's very tall. He's 6'5". He's an intimidating presence, and not in a scary way, but you walk into a room and you see Adam Newman immediately, and he has the kind of stature and personality to just sort of take over and be kind of the dominant person in the room. So, when I was interviewing him, you'd ask him a question and he may or may not answer it, but he's going to spin it into whatever point he wants to make. And that is a skill that not everyone has. I think I'm sure I was charmed to some degree. In other ways, I was sort of going into it being skeptical. But I talked to everyone from young college students who were coming into WeWork and saw Adam as this very inspirational figure to seasoned business executives who joined the company sort of in the middle of their careers, maybe saw a little bit of kind of the crazy in Adam and were maybe a little skeptical, but also thought, if anyone's gonna pull this off, it's gonna be him. It's gonna be him because he doesn't live in the same reality that the rest of us do. That he is willing to work hard. He is smart, and he's a little deranged. He's a little willing to just kind of do things that others wouldn't. So I think that much was clear even from meeting him kind of briefly.
So, all right, the second figure in this bromance is a Japanese investor named Masayoshi Son.
Yeah.
Now, Masa is one of the most brilliant and famous investors in the world. He's one of the richest men in the world. And it's funny, he made one of the most lucrative investments, some consider maybe the best investment of all time. He invested $20 million in Alibaba, which is like the Chinese Amazon, run by Jack Ma. He met Jack Ma and he had this he said he had this like animal kind of attraction. The word animal is used in there, but he just sort of saw it in Jack Ma's eyes basically and put 20 million into that company, which became $100 billion. And so now Masayoshi Son runs this thing called the Vision Fund, which is one of the largest pools of investment in the world. It's a $100 billion fund that he's trying to park in technology all over the world. And he came into this story about 2016, 2017. And, you write in the book, I think rightly that, had he not entered the scene, the book, the story never would have become what it was. Like that company maybe would have gone public. It would have been more rational, but Masayoshi Son did enter the scene and he had the same kind of like feeling, and he's famous for going on his gut when he met Adam. And this story is now very famous, but I just want to give it to you, Reeves. Sure. Tell the story of the famous 12-minute office tour.
Sure. Yeah. So this was at the end of 2016. Masa was in New York. Masa goes by one name. He's sort of a Cher-like figure, Madonna in that way, at least in business circles. He was in New York actually to meet Donald Trump, the newly elected president. He had a meeting with him. And then he also scheduled a tour of WeWork headquarters with Adam. He and some other SoftBank leaders were supposed to come for a couple hours, but he was late, showed up, told Adam he had 12 minutes, go and show me the space. And so Adam quickly walked him through a WeWork space at headquarters, took him to the R&D lab that WeWork had, which was sort of their attempt at kind of trying to bring a technological sheen to what they were doing. And then they were out the door. They were in the back of Masa's car, and 15 minutes later, they had signed on an iPad an informal agreement for Masa to invest $4.4 billion, billion with a B, into WeWork, which was sort of an unfathomable amount, more money than WeWork had raised, more money in a single investment than any other company up to that point. And it really was a moment that changed WeWork's fortunes in all kinds of ways.
So, and the whole thing, never set foot in a WeWork facility.
You'd never been in one before, yeah.
30 minutes later in the back of the car, he forks over $4.4 billion.
Yeah, that's it, and that's the way that both sides of that tell this story, and to get into the weeds and then circle back a little bit. From that moment until the money hitting WeWork's bank account, all kinds of due diligence, all kinds of lower level SoftBank people picking at the business of WeWork and frankly being kind of skeptical of it and saying, why are we invest in technology companies? Why are we investing in a real estate business? We don't totally understand how this company is going to do what Adam is claiming it's going to do. All that skepticism was expressed. But at the end of the day, much as Adam was sort of the central figure at WeWork, and any decision sort of went through him, any decision at SoftBank and at the Vision Fund in particular, when making these big investments, goes through Masa. And if he says yes, and if he believes in Adam as he did, he's not a dumb guy. He knew all of the potential issues, and the reasons to be skeptical, but ultimately he believed in Adam, and ultimately he was the one who said, we're going to do this.
It's amazing. I mean, this guy, if you guys don't know Masa, just like look up an interview with him and just watch him for a little while.
Yeah.
He's just fascinating guy, totally brilliant. But he also talks about investing like he uses Star Wars terms. He's like, you have to like go with your feeling, Luke. He like quotes Yoda about going with your gut. And ultimately he's put, I think the ultimate number is something north of $10 billion into this company. And it's like a real question, how much, if any of that is going to come back to him. Ultimately, by the way, he said he's admitted now that he, quote, created a monster when it came to Adam. So it's just a remarkable turnaround for that bromance. Look, we've got a couple questions from the audience that I want to get to. But first, I just want to take a moment, guys, and I want to read. These are like, I had a list. I was like taking a list. I was reading this book of like all my favorite crazy ass anecdotes from this book, but I'm just going to read like my top 5.
All right, I'm excited. There's a lot of anecdotes.
There's so many good ones. I had to really pare this list down. I had 10 originally, but top 5 craziest things, just to give you an idea of the insanity, especially after Masa came in. And then I'm actually going to ask you, Reeves, at the end, if like, what's your favorite or couple favorite that just kind of embody the craziness. But here we go. Okay. So at the Goldman Sachs IPO pitch session, the staid buttoned down Goldman Sachs compared Adam to Mother Teresa, Steve Jobs, Lin-Manuel Miranda, and Bob Marley. Okay, this is a guy who runs a real estate company. At a party celebrating a recent $600 million investment, Adam sprayed the investor that gave him $600 million with a fire extinguisher. Like, thank you for the $600 million. Okay, next, this is a quote from your book. Quote, WeWork had secured an additional $702 million in debt financing, an oddly specific number that was arrived at when Adam, who was celebrating his 39th birthday, multiplied his age by 18, which is a lucky number in Judaism. That's how he decided he needed $702 million. There's another great scene, which is Adam, it's like totally surreal. He's walking around barefoot in Manhattan when his IPO is basically imploding. And then finally, the last one, this is a quote from the book. The company referred to its New York City headquarters as its, quote, galactic headquarters. And Adam told a reporter in 2015 that WeWork Mars is in our pipeline. He fantasized about working with Elon Musk. Quote, when he gets everybody to Mars, we're going to build a community there like there's never been. So, I mean, there's other times he refers to himself. He's going to be the first trillionaire. He's going to be president of the world. I mean, the grandiosity just sort of knew no bounds. But what are some of your favorite recollections?
I mean, there's no shortage of bombastic things that Adam has said or done. And I think he believed a lot of it. And he didn't necessarily believe maybe that WeWork was definitely going to be on Mars, but he thought it was possible. And so he was someone who thought it was possible one day. And so why not just say it? I'll go in a different direction just to add a little variety. I think my favorite character in the book is a 16-year-old high school student who went by Joey Cables. And he was a guy who had an office in the first WeWork in New York City. He was sort of kind of a high school prodigy. He had his own business, sort of doing networking work for startups. WeWork was having trouble with its Wi-Fi, and they asked Joey if he would come help them. And then a few months later, they hired Joey Cables, 16-year-old high school junior, who then dropped out of high school, to be their director of IT. So this was a company that was claiming to be a tech company that had a 16-year-old running the network. So he's just my perfect example of kind of the range of characters that sort of came into this company at various points.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, it's just remarkable. I mean, like that's, there was a few other things I wanted to get into about like the different mission statements of the company, about raising the consciousness of the world. Yeah. At one point, a mission statement was to operationalize love.
Yeah.
That's what the company does. But it's just, guys, you just got to read the book. I mean, I could just go on and on. I mean, so I have one more question for you before we get to the audience questions, and that's just sort of like, tell me how this ended. I mean, just tell us what happened a year ago when the IPO was called off and all that stuff.
Sure. So in August of 2019, well, in the spring of 2019, the company announced it was going public. That's a process that takes months and months and months to get ready for, which the company then spent the summer doing. In August, they released the paperwork. It's sort of a boring financial document called an S1 that any company who's trying to go public has to release. Airbnb and DoorDash will be going public soon, have released theirs. And WeWork's became public and immediately came in for ridicule, criticism, mockery. There was the fact that it was losing $2 billion a year. There were all the problems with the business model. And then there was all of the kind of kooky stuff. There was a mission statement that I will butcher, but it was basically dedicated to this financial prospectus that is supposed to just be charts and numbers and footnotes and small type, was dedicated to the energy of we. There were all of these these like, sort of, it was just like a well-designed, like looked like a glossy magazine. And it just sort of fed into this notion of like, that this was a company with not a lot of substance, or at least that was trying to gloss over what it actually was. So over the course of a 6-week span, the company was at one point theoretically worth $47 billion. 6 weeks later, after all of this criticism and too many sort of strange moments to get into here, the company announced that Adam was being pushed out as CEO. All of this sort of everything that sort of surrounded him and all of the kind of craziness that had helped the company along the way was suddenly, when the stock market was involved, not something investors wanted. And the company eventually pulled its IPO entirely. And it was sort of, frankly, just kind of the most embarrassing sort of attempt at an IPO that any company had ever made. WeWork still exists. The company has tried to pivot. Obviously, doing so in the pandemic has made the problem all the much harder. But the Adam Newman era of WeWork is over for now.
Got it. All right. Well, we're gonna end up asking about where Adam is now and like ultimately like what's next. But I don't want to wait another minute asking questions from the audience. So several people actually have asked this question. 3 people asked sort of the same question, which is, what does Adam think of this book? Like, I mean, I know it just came out, but have you talked to him? And I guess like to the extent that Masa himself or anybody else would have something to say, but just very curious, because like there's a part in the book where you talk about so an employee coming to you and saying like, oh, are you just writing another puff piece? And I don't know what the impression was that Adam had about what kind of book this would be. So. Yeah.
I haven't heard from Adam is the short answer. I don't know what he thinks of the book. I have heard from people who are close to him or were close to him. And I think generally that they feel that it's fair. And I think one thing I want to be clear about is that there's many ways in which Adam comes in for mockery and criticism along the way, but there's also a version of this that can be read as a how-to guide to becoming a successful entrepreneur. I mean, Adam is worth hundreds of millions of dollars. The title is an allusion to the fact that he might be worth $1 billion, depending on sort of how things play out with now that lawyers are involved in his sort of payout, leaving the company. But it can't be dismissed the ways that Adam led to WeWork being a success for a very long time. So, I hope that if he has read it or if he does, that he will sort of recognize kind of both sides of that.
Yeah. Another question, sort of a longer question, but I'll try to summarize it best I can, is about kind of like the extent to which he's symbolic of a certain era. And you touched on this in the book, kind of comparing him in a sense to Trump. I mean, these two figures are very interestingly similar, right? Like real estate guys, cult-like following, his followers just kind of rationalize the excesses away. Sort of like he just always kind of seems to come out on top, at least financially, even if he loses a lot of money for other people. And so the question is just sort of like, is this decade of like, it almost feels like the roaring 20s almost. I mean, I read this book and I'm just like, oh God, like the society that lets this happen, like sort of deserves, to be corrected. you know?
Yeah, I think that's right. And I mean, clearly none of us sort of predicted what's happened in this year,
Yeah.
or would have hoped for that if a correction was necessary. But I do think, I tried to sort of steer clear of making too many Adam and Donald Trump comparisons, but Adam and Jared Kushner were good friends. Going back to the early 2010s, they were both just kind of in the real estate world in New York City. And became friends that way. Adam has met Donald Trump, met him while he was president, got an invitation to the White House. Setting politics aside, I think that Adam couldn't have helped but sort of see Donald Trump's success and take some lessons away from that, lessons about how being bombastic can be and leaving the truth to be decided by others can be an asset. Lessons in knowing your audience and feeding your audience kind of what they want to hear, whether that's investors or your employees or the media or whoever it is. So I think there is a way in which the era was defined by people who were successful in large part just through bluster, and not only through bluster, but as that being a sort of a core part of being a successful in business or politics or whatever else in the 2010s. And I don't know what the lessons any of us are going to learn. Again, like I think there are people who will see the Adam Newman story and say, I'm going to learn a lesson here or there, but I'm still going to do the kinds of things that he did because I want to make hundreds of millions of dollars. So we'll see what lessons, if any, the world of entrepreneurs and investors take from this.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I recently read this biography of Elon Musk, and if you look at Elon Musk or you look at Steve Jobs, I mean, like these guys, these kind of like real like disruptors and world changers, they do have that bluster. I mean, like yep. Elon Musk also talks about going to Mars and he wants to die on Mars, right? But the thing is that Elon has a lot of other things to back him up, and he has a lot of other attributes that allow him to be a successful businessman. But I think that like that bluster is sort of a necessary feature. It's a question of like, how far can bluster alone get you, you know?
Yeah, it's true. And it's like, what do you want? Like if you want to build a company that goes to Mars, you probably need that. You probably need to be a little bit crazy. There are hundreds, possibly thousands of people who run businesses like WeWorks. They have 2 or 3 spaces in Austin or Minneapolis or Chicago or Bangkok or London or wherever it is. And they don't have a desire to kind of take over the world. To build a dominant company. They like running a nice office space and giving people a good day at work. Adam wanted something else. And so, if you're, it sort of depends on what your goal is. And if you want to shoot for the moon or Mars, you're going to have to be a little crazy. And the line between crazy in a way that sends things off the rails, like Adam, and someone like Elon, who, like, knock on wood, is still on the path. He seems to veer in different directions all the time. But it's very thin, and it is a little hard to tell exactly who's on which side.
Oh, so well put. I had that very feeling myself. I mean, I was reading your book and I felt sort of convinced by Adam. Even just reading his words, I felt kind of carried away sometimes. So it is very kind of seductive. All right. One more question from the audience and one more question from me. Other question from the audience is, have the movie rights been sold?
Not for this book, but there are I've lost count of how many possible potential WeWork movies and or TV shows are in production. Wow. I talked to an actor I won't name who's has thought about the role. There are various things that may or may not happen, but certainly I would expect that the WeWork story will get an on-screen treatment sooner than later.
Okay. I mean, if Zuckerberg, if they could make a movie out of Zuckerberg and his like desire to be in a social club at Harvard, boy, they can make a movie out of this. Yeah. All right. I think that's, like you said, inevitable. All right. Hey, last question for me is this. I ask this question to everybody. Mostly we talk to fiction folks here, probably 2/3 fiction. And so this is sort of more apt for a fiction author, but I think it does work for nonfiction as well. And the question is like, if you had an ideal reader for this book, and in some ways, I think I'm the ideal reader for your book. I love this book so much. But like, if just imagine this ideal reader, and they get to the last page and they close it, and tell me, like, what feeling do you want to leave them with, if that's even a calculation of yours, or what feeling do you imagine that they would have at the end of your book?
I think what I would hope is that people come away thinking that something is a little wrong with the system that we have in place, the economic system, and what it rewards. And there's a quote I love that's sort of 2/3 of the way through the book, where it's kind of at a point. I was talking to a guy who was in the same world as Adam, sort of on the way when WeWork was still on the way up, and he was a guy who got his MBA. He worked in finance. He worked for a hedge fund. He started his own company. As he put it to me, he's like, I am a capitalist. That is who I am. And then he said, I look at the WeWork story, and if Adam pulls this off, if he's successful by blustering along the way, by doing all of the things that he's doing, maybe this system doesn't actually work. Maybe it doesn't actually work the way that I hope and think that it does. And so I won't pretend to say that this book presents many things in the way of solutions. I think that's a very complicated question, but I do hope that it sort of, people take a look at this book and come out of it having read the story of a guy who in some ways was very successful, in other ways had his life blow up, and not put all the blame on him, but sort of take a minute to say, like, it feels like something's a little off in the way we all operate, and we need to think about that.
Wow, so well put, so well put. And normally I would end on that, but I do want to ask you, because I don't think we got to it, just where is Adam now?
Adam is bouncing between, as far as I'm aware, a home in the Hamptons on Long Island, and Tel Aviv. He's Israeli, which we haven't talked about, but he's from there, and he has been kind of bouncing between the two and planning his next move. I've heard inklings of things of what he may or may not be doing. He's made some investments in companies, but he's 41 years old. I would not expect that this is the last we will hear from him. He has some reputational repair to do, but he's the kind of guy who is going to want to try to have a second act. And I think he's the kind of guy who people are going to give him a chance for all the same reasons they gave him a chance for the first time. So he's laying low for the moment, but I think he will be back in our lives one way or another.
And even though, I mean, the company once had a valuation of, say, $47 billion, and now who knows, there's a lot of different estimates about what it's actually worth now. Yeah. But some people saying it's not worth nothing, but others saying, maybe 10, 12 billion, whatever it may be. But the bottom line is, with all that happened and him leaving as CEO, he still made a lot of money, right? I mean,
made a lot of money. Yeah. I mean, his official, it's complicated, but the round number for his buyout from the company was $1 billion. He hasn't gotten that yet. It would take a while to talk through all of the legal wrangling that is going through. He may not see that full amount, but he had already cashed out hundreds of millions of dollars worth of his stock. He's likely to get even more. And so, for better or worse, Adam Newman financially will be fine.
Yeah, I mean, I was struck by he had five mansions, I think, by last count, and also he owns a forest in Belize.
Yes, they had, for the purpose of conservation, they had purchased a forest in Belize, and 5 mansions is probably right. Depends on how you define mansion, but I think that's fairly safe to say.
Wow. Okay. Anyway, I keep wanting to go on and on, ask more questions, but we're going to cut it there. Reeves, can you just hold up the book one more last time?
Sure, I'd be happy to.
Go ahead and make an impulse buy. We're putting all the links in the chat. Go ahead and buy it right now. Buy it for Christmas. Buy it for your whole family. Buy it for every capitalist you know.
Yeah, exactly. Capitalist or anti-capitalist. Either one will find something to enjoy in the book, I think.
Excellent. All right, Reeves, thank you very much. Guys, next week we'll be back. I'm going to speak with Frederick Joseph, who wrote a really cool book called The Black Friend, How to Be a Better White Person, which is certainly I'm trying to do this year. But it's going to be a very fascinating discussion on race. So please tune in for that a week from today. And once again, Reeves, just want to say thank you so much and congratulations on the book.
Great. Thanks for having me, Mark.
All right, we'll see you next week, folks.